when you set the bar low for yourself, anything extra you get done feels like gravy. And you can tell yourself at the end of the day, I win. I crossed off my 1 to 3 things. I'm not going to go to bed feeling guilty and kicking myself for all the things that I could have gotten done, quote unquote, should have gotten done. You're just going to pick a few and win the day that way. So that is a good way to start when you're feeling overwhelmed.
Hey there, you're listening to the Girls Talking Life podcast, and I'm your host, Johanna. If you're like me, you love time with friends that always leave feeling encouraged, inspired to try something different, or I've learned something new. So why not continue to grow even when we can't be with our girlfriends? We're not made to do life on our own. So in each episode of this show, I'll bring you a girl and her story to give you refreshing ideas to stir your soul. Let's walk this road together. Are you ready to talk life? Welcome to the show. I am so glad you're here. Do you struggle with using your time well? Do you feel like you don't have enough time to get everything done? Have you ever wondered what the Bible says about time management? I am so pleased to introduce you to my guest, Sarah K. Butterfield. Sarah joins me today to remind us that we can trust God to give us the time we need for what He's called us to. She shares practical steps we can take to calm our overwhelming to-do lists. Sarah gives us time management examples from Jesus' life, and she gives us some ways that we can steward our time well as we enter into this new year. Sarah is the author of Around the Clock Mom, Make the Most of Your God-Given Time, a resource filled with practical wisdom and biblical inspiration to help busy moms steward their time faithfully. Everything that Sarah and I talk about can be found in the show notes for today's episode on girlstalkinglife.com. Here's our conversation. Hello, Sarah. Thank you so much for coming on Girls Talking Life.
Thanks so much for having me.
It is January. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.
I feel like the beginning of the year is a great time. It's when people are just naturally resetting their schedules or thinking about how they might want to change the way they're doing things. So you help women steward their time well. And that is why I invited you on today. Would you tell me just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Sarah. I've been married for 19 years to my husband, Max, who's a psychology professor. And we have 2 boys who are, one just turned 8 and the other is 9.5. So they are 18 months apart. And that was part of the drive for me to manage my time wisely and steward my time faithfully as a mom. Yeah, it really started when we moved to San Diego from where we had temporarily been living in Texas. We moved with a 13-month-old and I was pregnant with the next one.
Wow.
And we moved here for my husband's job. We were very excited to be in California. But what none of us saw coming is that my husband's schedule as a first-year professor was so intense and so demanding that he was not able to take a day off of work and stay home with us for 3 solid months. So he went into work on August 25th, and his first day off was Thanksgiving.
Oh my.
It was intense, chasing after a toddler and feeling a little bit like I was doing this all on my own. And of course, it's not like being a single parent exactly, but it did feel like a lot to juggle. And on top of that, I was learning the ropes of being a stay-at-home mom after having taught special education for several years. And so we were transitioning with this move to San Diego and with suddenly a whole day to fill with a toddler and feeling like it was all on me to do all the things and manage the household and not go insane, trying to carve out time for myself and just kind of learning to juggle all that. And then, we kept saying, oh, you know what? Next semester will be so much better. But of course, next semester rolled around and I gave birth to my second little boy, which was a beautiful blessing, but added its own layer of chaos. So I really started thinking about how to steward my time well, because I felt this push and pull of I want them to hurry up and grow up so that life will be less intense and easier. But I also want them to stay little forever. And that tension, the book was kind of born from that tension. And it was also born out of very practical needs of how do I get everything done? And how do I also carve out the time that I need to reset and refuel? So that is kind of the idea for the book. And of course, I didn't find the time to write it until both kids went off to school. So that is the reality of motherhood for you.
Okay. So you were kind of thrown at the deep end, and you discovered ways through those early years to carve out that time and be a good steward of your time. And you wrap this all up in this book, Around the Clock Mom, make the most of your God-given time once they were able to go to school and you had a little extra time to yourself to write it. I love that story. So for me, I have always felt like time was my nemesis, and it may have started when I had my children. I'm not totally sure, but it runs out too quickly. I underestimate the amount of time that something takes usually. So I am so glad that you are here to give us your biblical ideas on time and practical things that we can do to manage it better just overall. So Sarah, where would you have someone start if they're just feeling overwhelmed, whether it's with motherhood or work or their home or all of the above?
Well, overwhelm is a real thing and a real problem. And I think of Jesus and the crowds that followed him, the very, very needy crowds that followed him and shouted his name and needed healing and compassion and a listening ear. And I just picture how overwhelming I would be in that situation. But Jesus took one person at a time, right? I don't think he let the needs of the crowd overpower his ability to do what needed to be done one person at a time. So in a very practical sense, when we are feeling overwhelmed, we need to make a list. To me, this helps. I will admit, not everybody likes seeing all that they need to do on a piece of paper. But when you have it all in front of you, you can do some triage and you can decide. See, it's all going to feel important, but you can decide, you know what, some of this can be done later. Some of it can be dropped altogether. A good question to ask is, what is the worst thing that will happen if this doesn't get done? And can I live with that? And then you will be left with a few urgent things that you can prioritize. And to just pick the next thing that you're going to do. As a rule, for myself, my to-do list never has more than 1 to 3 items that I'm going to cross off my list today. Now that's in addition to like wiping the counters and doing the myriad of little tasks that come with daily living. Right. But if I have if I need to go to the post office, if I have other things that I want to get done today, and never more than 1 to 3, because when you set the bar low for yourself, anything extra you get done feels like gravy. And you can tell yourself at the end of the day, I win. I crossed off my 1 to 3 things. I'm not going to go to bed feeling guilty and kicking myself for all the things that I could have gotten done, quote unquote, should have gotten done. Mm-hmm. You're just going to pick a few and win the day that way. So that is a good way to start when you're feeling overwhelmed. And I do also want to say another thing that contributes to our overwhelm is that as women, we are typically carrying a mental load, which is really all the invisible work that goes to running a household. It's knowing when we're going to be running out of shampoo. It's knowing what size of clothes the kids are in, what the pantry needs to be restocked. We tend to keep a lot of that stuff in our head.
Definitely.
Yes. And so it's just amazing how much clutter is just floating around our minds that honestly, our partners might have no idea that we're carrying. And I know in our marriage, my husband has his own mental load that he's carrying from all his tasks at work. And so there is a way to declutter this mental load when you can be willing to ask for help. And I have a little mental load worksheet you can download on my website when you subscribe that helps you list all that invisible work, and it helps you think through who's usually responsible for that and then is a great tool to go to your partner and be like, hey, what can you take off my plate so that I don't have to think about it? So sometimes having an honest conversation with your partner and being willing to ask for help or delegate can also help us in our sense of overwhelm.
Something I've been doing lately too, you talk about getting it out, is setting reminders for myself or writing it down in my notes on my phone, just so it's out of my head. I don't have to think about it. I will be reminded of it at some point in the future when I need to know about it, so I can kind of let that go.
That's right. Yes. I love using the reminder app on my phone because when something comes up, like an email or something, and I can't deal with it right away, but I know that's going to be something that's urgent that I need to remember later, it goes right into my phone and I can release it from my mental load. That's a great tip.
Okay. So write everything down, everything that you feel like you need to do, ditch some things from the list that aren't top priority, prioritize the rest. And you said even put them in maybe what needs to get done first. So maybe tomorrow I'm only going to have 1 to 3 things from this master list that I'm going to focus on. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Love that. You mentioned Jesus just a little bit and how he was not overwhelmed. I don't think the Bible paints him as overwhelmed ever.
No.
What lessons can we learn from him about how to manage our time?
I love this question because I feel like the Bible doesn't necessarily always address time management, especially in Jesus's life. But I think there are clues that we can kind of infer from the gospel accounts. And so 3 things come to mind for me. And the first thing is that there is a season for everything. And I know this word and this concept is overused, but when I think about Jesus's life, like he didn't do it all at once. He lived his childhood, and then he lived what I imagine was a long season of learning how to be a carpenter and working alongside his earthly father, Joseph, right? And he wasn't engaging in his healing and preaching and traveling until the last 3 years of his life. And I don't think that Jesus would say that those years of carpentry were a waste of his time, right? It was important. It was part of his earthly embodied life. It was one season. Just like sometimes we're called to narrow our focus in certain seasons as well. I think as women in this country, we've really been told that we have to do it all and do it all at once. But really, we can trust God to give us the time to do all that we feel we are called to do, right? It just might not be at all the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that's one thing. And then another thing is, I think he took time to rest and pray, and he took the time to take care of his physical body. He napped. We know he enjoyed good food, and he cared enough about celebrations to do his first miracle at a wedding by providing all that tasty wine, right? And he also often stole away to a quiet place to pray and reconnect with God. And I think when we, as moms and as busy women, take the time to care for our own physical and spiritual needs, I think we are actually following the example of Christ. My heart is really that we would drop the guilt in that. And then the third thing is Jesus welcomed interruptions. I'm so amazed by how he treated people who interrupted him. Mm-hmm. And it seems like this was happening constantly. The bleeding woman who touched his cloak as he was on his way somewhere else. The crowds who followed him as he was trying to withdraw to a quiet place. The leper who literally blocked his path, asking for cleansing in Matthew chapter 8. And Jesus never brushes them off, and he never gets irritated or rushes past them, right? For him, all of those needy people weren't getting in the way of his agenda. They were his agenda.
Wow, that's such a good point, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, this is how I aspire to treat my kids because so often I feel like, okay, you are getting in the way of mommy's very important work, but really they are giving me new opportunities every day to practice my patience and treat them as more important than whatever else I was paying attention to. So I love how Jesus models that so beautifully for us.
Yes, I really like that. Interruptions, I'm not good with that either. So you're right. The people in his path were just that, and he treated them as his main priority. So really good. What are some other things that we can do maybe to save time in our home or to manage our time better?
Okay. Well, I have a lot of ideas that I share in my book, but here are some of the ones that are the most helpful for me. The first is to stop multitasking. So we all kind of think this is necessary, and many of us think that we're awesome at it. But the research actually shows that switching your mental focus between two or more tasks actually results in taking more time to complete those tasks than if we had just focused on one thing at a time. So, for example, I cannot write my grocery list and also listen to my husband telling me about his day. It's going to end up in hurt feelings or, yeah. So the only time multitasking works is when we are pairing an automatic activity or something that you can do on autopilot, like walking or driving or exercising, with one that requires mental focus. So
Yes.
if you're trapped on the couch and you're feeding a baby, you can absolutely make that doctor's appointment at the same time. That kind of multitasking works. But if you're trying to answer an email and trying to meal plan at the same time, this will cost you time in the end. And I'm so guilty of this. I have 10 tabs up on my computer and I start doing one thing and I'm like, oh, wait, over here, let me just do this real quick. And then I end up, even though I know better, I end up switching between the tabs on my computer, where the research shows if I just focus on one thing until it's done, I'm actually going to save myself time.
I do that in my house too. I'll be working in the kitchen and I need to take something to a different room. And then in that other room, I see something else that needs done.
And then we're following this rabbit trail of tasks that need our attention.
Right. So back to the list, even with that, this is what I set out to do. This is what was on my list. I'm going to stick with it and not try to multitask.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is to anticipate your needs. So think about your biggest pain points in your day-to-day life. What is draining your energy and what's eating up your time? So for me, especially when both of my boys were like preschool age and home with me, it was their constant snacking. It just seemed like every time I turned around, they were asking for another snack. It felt like my whole life was putting pretzels in a baggie or chopping up apples at the counter. And finally, I solved this problem by having a special basket in the pantry ready chopped fruit in the fridge. That's how I solved that problem. But for others, it could be preparing breakfast the night before or getting backpacks ready and placed by the door if leaving the house is a struggle for you. I even have a friend who was raising 3 boys, and her biggest struggle was getting them dressed. She couldn't get them dressed in the morning. And finally, one day she's like, I give up. Just the night before, she's like, choose your outfit, get into it, and go to sleep. And when you wake up, we'll be ready to roll. And that worked for her. And that, like, points for creativity, like,
Right.
Whatever your biggest pain point is, there's probably something you can do ahead of time to make the process go smoother. So anticipate your needs. And then my last piece of advice is the hardest for me. It's to say no more often. And this is hard for me because I'm a people pleaser, but I've learned to guard the white space in my calendar for what matters. And I've learned to ask these 5 questions when faced with a new opportunity or before taking on a new responsibility. So the 5 questions that I filter my decision through is, who will I disappoint if I say no? Who will I please if I say yes? Who am I trying to impress? Will saying yes distract me from what I value or enable me to pursue what I value? And am I choosing out of love or out of fear? And those 5 questions have helped me prioritize what extra things I take on and what we say no to.
That's really good. My oldest daughter ran cross country last fall, and she's a 9th grader. So she was new to the team. It was her first year in a high school sport. And I really wanted to, I hate to say impress the other parents, but I definitely wanted to, show that I was a dedicated parent and I wanted to support the team. So I ended up saying yes to too many things in a season that's already kind of busy, the fall, back to school. And I regretted that. So I really appreciate those questions that you shared with us.
I hope they're helpful.
Yes, definitely. Sarah, what are some other ideas that we can do just to start off the year and kind of take take stock of what we are doing with our time currently in order to maybe implement some of the things that you've mentioned?
Well, I love the start of the new year as it's such a natural time for reflection.
Right.
What's been working and what's not working. And I find it helpful to not, at the beginning of the year, we want to be saying, oh yeah, 2022 is going to be the year I ...
Mm-hmm.
And I find it really helpful to not make our goals or our intentions like a whole year long thing, because there are so many different seasons in the year, just in terms of like the school year and the summer, and things change throughout the year in ways that you don't expect or predict. So for me, I find it helpful to focus on like, okay, here are the couple of months we're in, maybe until like spring break or until the end of the school year. This is going to be the intention that I set, the goals that I want to achieve. I'm going to name what matters for our family in this season for the rest of the school year, for example, and then kind of to reevaluate once summer rolls around and the circumstances might be different or look different. And same for the fall with its different sports that come up. You kind of can see sometimes our lives are a little bit predictable, and you can see what's coming down the line, and okay, like summer is typically a slower time for me, or, conversely, summer is usually super busy with travel and this and that. And so I think when you can reflect and take some time to think about, okay, what do we have going on as a family in this season? What do I have going on personally that I might want to accomplish in this season, and not feel the pressure to make it like this is a whole year long thing we're going to do every single day for the whole year, but to really just take it a couple months at a time. And also to not try to, I feel sometimes the pressure to change my whole life, every single thing. Every January, I'm going to change all the things, but really to focus in on what matters most to you. What do you value the most for yourself and for your family? And just pick like one or two things that you're going to focus on. Make it easy and attainable for yourself.
That is so good. I love the idea of breaking your year up into chunks so you can plan accordingly. Well, the last thing I wanted to ask you about time, I feel like most of our time is spent working in some aspect, whether it is in your job or your home, or for me, working on this podcast. There's always work to do. But what about enjoying ourselves? What about savoring our time? You have this lovely blog post on your website about savoring your time right now. Talk to me about how we can do that.
Yes, savor was my word of the year for 2020. And, little did I know I was going to have lots of opportunity to savor very tiny moments. But I still think savoring our lives is, number one, it's a way to be present to our everyday lives. And number two, I think it's a way that we can practice gratitude. So if you are not into making lists of what you're grateful for, and I get it, not everybody is a list maker, savoring is really a way you can practice gratitude in your own life, because I've heard savoring defined this way. It's to feel pleasure in something and then to recognize that you feel pleasure. So it's gratification plus acknowledgement, right? And so when you are able to acknowledge that you are feeling pleasure about something, you can be grateful in that moment. And so I think it's important to note that not every moment or activity in our day is worth savoring, but I want to be better at lingering in the moments that are. And I think savoring is a way of living with more intentionality. But it's not something you can do when you're rushing, when you are overscheduled, or when you're plain too busy. I think in order to savor our lives right now as they are, we need to slow down, which is something that feels more and more countercultural these days. Yeah. And I also think there's something to be said for being deliberate in scheduling moments and activities that are worth savoring. We often use a free 5 or 10 minutes scrolling our phones, but what if we indulge in a miniature leisure activity? Like this would look different for everyone, but for me, it would be like, well, what if I light my fancy expensive candle? And what if I sit here and read a poem instead of scrolling? Or what if I indulge in one of the facial masks I got for my birthday? Or, hey, remember how fun it was to flip the pages of an actual magazine? So, it's not discounting those little moments. So just to even be deliberate in scheduling them for yourself.
I feel like you can even pair something with something you have to do anyway. So walking the dog, for instance, put in your favorite podcast in your ears, or just enjoy the outside and take some deep breaths and do some, thoughtful meditation. Just there's something else you can pair with what all you have to do anyway.
Exactly. Yes. My house ends up so much cleaner when I have a good audiobook to listen to, for example.
Yes. So that's enjoyable. And I guess it's the mindless multitasking we were talking about earlier.
It is. Exactly. It's the multitasking that works.
Yes. But add something in that you can savor. That is so important. Well, I want to move into the portion of the show where I get to know just a little bit more about you. And I would love to hear what your favorite 5 things are right now. What are 5 things that you are reading or wearing or watching that are your favorites?
Okay, so I had a lot of fun with this question and narrowing it down to just 5. But at the top of my list right now is the dark chocolate sea salt caramels from Sanders. And you can get them in grocery stores, I think, but I get a big jar of them at Costco. And they are so delicious, and it's like rich enough to be satisfied with just 1 or 2. So it's not something that I am like likely to binge like Oreos, but it is just so satisfying. So I have 1 or 2 of those every day.
Delicious.
Yes. The next thing is lip gloss. So I've had like this love-hate relationship with lip gloss, in that I like the idea of it, but I'm always like, why? Because it goes away so fast. I feel like it just disappears after an hour. And then I'm like putting on more lip gloss again. And I'm just like, I don't know if this is worth it, but I found one that I love. It's called Folly Fire Iridescent Lip Gloss. And it's got a really strong color and it's shiny and it lasts all day. And even when the shine fades, the color stays.
Oh, wow.
And so I have loved that. And then let's see, the third thing, is a new app that I'm really liking. It's called Dawn, DAWN. It's a daily spiritual practice app. And it's just designed to help Christians develop a consistent spiritual practice. It's interactive devotions. And they have like audio guided meditations and music playlists and like a daily practice section that guides you through scripture and helps you kind of release anxiety and practice gratitude and walks you through a prayer. And I just find it to be a great tool. And I think it's only like $2.99.
Okay. I've not heard of that, but it sounds really good. It is something you could add to your day for some time that you are savoring.
Yes, absolutely. And then my fourth thing is it's a 1 line a day journal. It's a 5-year 1 line a day journal. And I'm not sure if you can picture what I'm talking about, but it will have 1 page is for 1 day. So for example, like for, January 10th, it will have a section where you fill in the year and they'll have 5 sections of January 10th. So when you go to fill in January 10th at the end of the day, there's only room for like 2 or 3 sentences. You can see what you were doing last January 10th and the January 10th before that. And I started keeping one of these when my boys were really small. And I'm actually on my second 5-year journal. I think I'm in like year 8. And it is so incredible to look back and see kind of what I was doing with my days, 2 years, 3 years, 6 years, 7 years ago. And it does a few things. 1, it makes me grateful for where I am today. 2, I just realized like just the blessing that the journey is and has been in getting here. And the third thing that I love about it is that at the end of the day, when I go to write my 2 or 3 sentences in, I kind of ask myself, okay, what am I going to want to remember about what I did today? What is future me going to want to know?
That is so
and
sweet.
So, yeah. And it's really easy. If you're not a journaler to just do 2 or 3 sentences every day, it's been amazing. I love it.
My daughter is doing something where she writes down a good memory from the day. So every day she'll do it for this whole month and then have a collection, but yours is on a little bigger scale. I like that so much.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great project. And then the 5th thing is Okay, so background, I have very long hair and it used to be straight, but then something happened with my second pregnancy where my hair got a bit of curl into it and I don't know what to do with it anymore. So the thing that has been saving my life recently is it's like a one-step roller brush and hair dryer tool. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yes.
But I know Revlon makes one. I've got one by Bedhead, and it saves. So if I ever want to blow dry my hair straight, instead of just taking the hair dryer and a roller brush and having my arms ache after half an hour, I just have this one tool, and it saves my arms, and it does save me a bit of time. So that's my other thing that I love right now.
I do the round brush and hair dryer. I have them both going. Yeah. So you have the combo. I like that.
Yes, it's been fun to play with.
Very nice. Thanks for sharing those with us. Well, Sarah, it has been lovely to talk with you and get to know you better. I feel like you've given us some great ideas of things that we can do to steward our time better. I appreciate that you have biblical insight and walked us through some things that Jesus did. He modeled for us on time management, even though the Bible doesn't call it out as time management, like you mentioned.
Right.
And I feel like there's definitely some tweaks that I'm going to take from this to make in my own life this year.
I hope it's been helpful. I'm still figuring this out as well. And I am still given multiple opportunities every day to practice what I write about and practice what I have learned. I think it keeps me humble to learn over and over these lessons about how to steward our time well.
Thank you so much for listening. Sarah has such good practical things we can do to steward our time well. I love that she said to set the bar low. I usually set the bar way too high, then I feel guilty when I don't accomplish everything that I set out to do that day. I also think the questions that she uses to make decisions about new opportunities are so valuable. Have you ever thought about Jesus's time management style before? I don't know that I have, other than thinking of him as unhurried. So I appreciate her focus on that too. All the ways that you can connect with Sarah are in the show notes, including a link to her book, Around the Clock Mom. And be sure to find and follow me on Instagram at Girls Talking Life for more community and encouragement for your week. Friends, don't let the conversation stop when the show is over. Share your stories and start your own conversations with the girls in your life. I will see you back here in 2 weeks. Thanks for tuning in.